Hi there, and welcome to our second book club on LinkedIn Live. So today we are talking about The Well-Gardened Mind, which has been a really, really good book. As with last time, I listened to it. The other three ladies have all read it properly. So as always, please do let us know where you're joining from, and please do feel free to ask a question during the session or add any comments. I can see that Karen has already joined us. So Karen has, I think she's read next month's book, so that's really good. Thank you, Karen. So you're going to have loads of questions for next time. And yes, please do listen in and ask any questions as we go through. So thank you very much. So yes, as I said, the book is Sue Stuart-Smith, The Well-Gardened Mind, Rediscovering Nature in the Modern World. So if we just go round and just quickly introduce yourself. So Gill, do you want to start?
Hi, yes, my name's Gill Amos, and I'm a leadership facilitator and an executive coach. I'm also trained as a florist.
Wow, excellent. Okay. And Rebecca?
Yeah, so my name's Rebecca Wilson. I, in my day job, help businesses sort out their data, so make sense of it, make better business decisions. I am a business book addict, and after reading this book, a newbie gardener too.
Excellent. And Alyson?
Hi, Alyson Ainsworth. I'm an executive coach, career transition coach, and also focus on resilience and mental health.
Brilliant. Okay. And we've got Jane coming in from Heidelberg. So hello, Jane. Nice to see you. Okay, so as last time, I had a quick look for a brief summary of the book because there is so much on here, and we've all kind of picked out our favourite parts of it. But this is what kind of Waterstone summarises out. So through moving stories of recovery, The Well-Gardened Mind definitely explores the healing effects of gardening on those who suffer from stress, addiction, depression or trauma. So I thought that was quite a good summary. I think there was 12 chapters as we go through. So what we've done is picked out 3 key areas that Gill, Alyson and Rebecca all really liked. My favourite part, which we'll come on to at the end if we've got time, was about something called Incredible Edible, which was a community project up in Manchester. So I really like that whole community feel that section explored. So we're going to start with Alyson, which was from the chapters on seeds and beliefs. And the quote that I picked out here was about gardening's having a levelling effect with not so much emphasis on pecking order or racial divide. So Alyson, do you want to give us your views on that chapter?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this book came out at the beginning of the pandemic, which actually was a very interesting time of crisis for a lot of people. And I know she'd been working on it for some time. And that whole thing around the power of nature and being able to reconnect, has helped people, particularly through the pandemic, who've been isolated. And she spends a lot of time talking about, the effect of stress in nature. But, what she says is gardening is accessible to everybody. And the whole thing about seeds and seeds having potential within them. There is that lovely quote she puts in there: seeds have tomorrow ready built in them. And I think that's such a lovely quote, because it is that whole thing about, all we have to do is unlock that potential. And growing gives us that sense of satisfaction. If you've harvested something you've grown yourself. And it comes across the whole sort of age range as well. Everybody has green fingers. It's not something, it's not a special gift that certain people have. And in the right situation, which is why the RHS run projects in schools and in large city centres. I know we're going to talk a bit more about that, and also in prisons, because the whole thing about the calmness and the environment it creates and builds, is a good equalizer, and it doesn't matter what age you are, what academic levels you have, etc. A couple of examples she uses in that particular chapter are around a project that they run in Luton, which is for 7-year-old children growing their own pumpkins, which I thought was really interesting. They're all in high-rise blocks. They have no gardens, and the whole novelty and the excitement about how it gave them confidence and motivation, particularly for children with low self-esteem. And it provided that new sense of interest and agency, and again, that whole thing about connecting into it. The other example that she talks about a lot in that particular chapter is the prison situation, and she focuses on a couple of projects. One is Rikers Prison in Manhattan, and they set up a horticultural project there, which is sponsored by a horticultural society. And the interesting fact about it is that at the end of the day, they expect repeat offenders. There is an expectation that within three years somebody will repeat offend. The chances of that happening, of people coming out of prison, is 60%. The people that went on the horticultural project, only between 10 and 15% of those reoffended. And I think that's a massive, massive statistic. I mean, that's almost cutting the reoffending data down by half, isn't it? Which is just incredible. And they say it is about that whole power of connecting, that they also get to work in communities when they come out of prison. So it gives them that extra level of interest. So that it feels like they've made something good happen. So that real element of positivity, which helps with our self-belief.
Excellent. Yeah. So, Rebecca, any comments on what Alyson's talked about? Anything else to add from that chapter?
Yeah, I thought what was really interesting about what she talked about, and it's the first time I'd kind of heard it this way, is the idea of kind of a conversation. So you plant a seed, and then you have to wait for nature to, that's your opener, and then you have to wait for nature to respond with growing the seed, and then you have to respond by watering it or giving it more light or whatever the case may be, and then it responds by blooming or not blooming or what have you. And what I thought was really interesting in terms of the kind of piece around self-belief is this kind of relationship. A lot of the people she talked about in the book have relationships that have broken down in some way, which has caused them to end up doing things that have caused them to end up in prison or having difficulties in some way. And this kind of idea of kind of having a safe conversation backwards and forwards with nature, essentially, and how that, you do a thing and then you see a response back, and a positive response, right? The seed just magically grows. I just thought that was a lovely way to see the world, and it made me understand why it would work to do these projects in prisons, etc.
Yeah, that's really good. And Gill?
For me, it's this equalising effect. So if people garden, they can talk to anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't matter who they are, how big your garden is. It gives you a common language. It gives you a common love of watching things grow, and getting your fingers in the soil. So whether you've got 10 acres or 10 square meters, you can all talk about the garden. And even today, I was on a webinar, and we were just talking about gardens before we started. So it's that conversation opener with anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And it does really grow. I mean, I am very aware of somebody who's doing gardening, just as we say. It's volunteer gardening, and there's all sorts of people there. But what's important when they're there is the garden, and that's what they focus on. So they have something to talk about and something in common.
Yeah, that's good. I think the thing I liked about the school situation particularly was where they were, she was talking about the fact that the children are kind of enclosed, which makes them feel safe because they're outdoors, but they're still in a relatively small area. So it was that kind of difference between sort of control, making sure that they're all safe, but also they did have that freedom and the fresh air, and that was really good. And yeah, I really liked the Halloween project that you referred to, Alice. It was really, really nice, and how quite a lot of the children initially were quite reluctant to join in. But then eventually, as they could see things starting to happen, they got more and more involved, and then have kind of developed it even further, haven't they? So it's been really good. So yeah, excellent. Okay, well we'll move on to our next section then. So that's Rebecca. So this was the chapter Bringing Nature to the City. So this is really relevant to Rebecca as she has moved from the city to the country. And so the chapter was called Bringing Nature to the City, and the quotes here were, "We pay the price for living in the city with our mental health, and then people who are healthier and wealthier tend to live in green areas." So do you want to take it away, Rebecca?
Yeah, so I think that, I lived in not central, but almost central London for sort of 10 years, and now I live in the middle of nowhere, in a little village. And I think what particularly struck me from this chapter was, yes, it's not revolutionary to hear that, you know, the more green space there is, the happier people are. That felt like something that you were like, yep, I buy that. What was interesting was or what I pulled out as interesting was kind of the more compounding effects. So one particular study they did was it's not just having access to green space that, you know, reduces anxiety, improves your mental well-being. It's also the biodiversity within that green space that has a compounded impact. And they also looked at things like buildings with trees next to them were associated with lower levels of violent crime and theft. And what's interesting is why, right? You can buy the research, but the why piece is really interesting. And she puts forward various theories around it. And the ones that I found particularly that I bought the most is particularly one around this idea that our brains have evolved to reward us for observing our environments. Because obviously way back when we needed to observe things as they changed, to find food, to find shelter, to find resource. And so what the brain has evolved to do is when you notice small changes, which of course plants change cyclically and have flowers on them, and last time they didn't have flowers on them, your brain then rewards you with dopamine. And the dopamine sort of makes you happier, makes you kind of feel more alive, makes you kind of optimistic. And this kind of idea that by having these green spaces, by kind of promoting this opportunity to build dopamine in each of the people, then, you know, reduces anxiety, improves your mental health, kind of reduces, you know, aggression. And the other experiment that was really interesting was one they did with rats. So they had sort of 3 cages of rats, lab rats. One cage, nothing in it. Another cage, sort of plastic toys for the rats to play with. And then another cage, they put sort of dirt and twigs and kind of natural things. And these lab rats were sort of, you know, 10th generation lab rats. They'd never been outside for generations. They'd never experienced nature. And what they found was the rats that had plastic toys were more alert, were more kind of happier, if you can say that about a rat. But what they observed in the cage with the kind of nature in it was that not only were they more alert and happier, they actually were more sociable. So they kind of seemed to kind of be generous to each other. They seemed to kind of interact with each other more and kind of empathize with each other. And what they put forward as a kind of theory as to why this is this idea of kind of, what do they call it, biophilia, which is human or animals' kind of affiliation with life. So our entire purpose of any species is to procreate, so the life of the species continues. And this kind of idea that even if we've never, as is the case in the rats, never been in an environment with nature, we just have this inbuilt need, kind of building block in who we are, what we are as animals, to kind of have this sense with nature, and this kind of sense that not only does it make us feel better, but it actually makes us connect more with other people. It was absolutely fascinating, and it's something that I recognized when I lived in London. You know, I'm not following the seasons as much, and I'm not, you know, I'm living in a concrete world, essentially doing the same thing. It doesn't really matter if it's December or, you know, June, really, apart from an extra jacket. But this kind of sense of kind of why, you know, that it is our affiliation with life, and it is this kind of observation, this slow changing observation that creates these the dopamine and the kind of connection effects. Kind of is like, that makes more sense than just people like green spaces, which is what I had perceived it to be before. Incredibly interesting research that she puts forward there.
Yeah, definitely. Excellent. Alyson, any views on what Rebecca just said, or anything else that stood out from that chapter?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, the company background is in psychology, and she is and psychoanalyst as well. She does talk a lot about the link to psychology, and that the study that is it Donald Winnicott did around transitional space, which I thought was really interesting. That whole thing about being in the world but not feeling pressured, and creating our own ideas and getting lost as we do, like as she talks about, like a child in play, is very much what you get from gardening, and and the garden being a refuge, being able to go for an escape from life. And again, she later on talks about that the trenches and and the war scenarios, and where life is filled with fear, and what Rebecca was saying about that the whole anecdote, or antidote, sorry, for fear is working or in a calming and unthreatening environment, and that's what the gardening space creates.
Excellent. Gill?
Yeah, I think when I read it, I really thought I was linking it to what the Royal Horticultural Society do in this country. And they do sponsor community garden projects. And they have also, which you may well have drawn on their research, of course, got research to show the impact of the greening of the environment and what that does. So I was actually thinking about these current projects, and also the well-being that comes with it. And it to me, it's just so powerful. But I don't need these things being sold to me. That's the interesting thing on a personal level, because it's something I've done. I come very much from a gardening family. My grandparents had a market garden, and just seeing how they thrived with it as well.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think the thing I liked in this section was about the brain hemispheres, and it talks about the difference between the left and the right, and it says the left brain hemisphere focuses on narrow focused technology, which is more kind of what you need for technology and things like that, whereas the right is much more broad and open attention to the surroundings. And what they're saying is that primarily, I think people that are living in this sort of city environment have a more dependence on technology, and it's shifted that 50-50 split of the brain, so that it's now 80% of the brain that is being used most of the time on that left hemisphere technology focused stuff. So it's kind of not surprising that it's affecting mental health, is it, if the brain's shifted that much? Okay. Right, so should we go on to our next chapter then? So this is Gill. So this is about the closing chapters. So there's 3 chapters here. So Garden Time, View from the Hospital, and Green Fuse. And all about this, gardens helping to achieve the balance between doing and being.
Yeah, I think very much so. And I think for me, the key thing was, because she does give lots of examples, including her own example when she suffered from burnout, and her own example of when she fractured her hip as well, is that gardening fundamentally forces us to slow down, because we have to match the pace of plant. We get that feelings of safe enclosures, and it puts us into a more reflective state of mind, because one thing I've certainly noticed is people don't do much reflection. So they just rush from one thing to the next, never stopping, almost not stopping to breathe, certainly not to breathe properly as well. So it's very much slowing people down. And there's been an increase in the amount of burnout people are getting, and home working has actually contributed to that. And that's when there isn't enough recovery time from all the work, and I guess that left brain activity, so that the ability to regulate stress is actually lost. And when people get burnout, they're very much focusing on the here and now, increased risk of depression, and also to physical problems. And she cites her own experiences of her increase in inflammatory arthritis and things like that. But when you're in the garden, you actually have to slow down. And she was looking particularly at a study done in Sweden with women suffering with burnout at a university. And they attended for 4 mornings a week for 12 weeks. And the garden was designed almost to have that, parts of it were very woodland and safe space. Time to think, time to reflect. Japanese gardens are gardens without flowers. They're designed with water and trees, and they are designed as reflective spaces. And this garden had incorporated these sort of woodland areas, probably quite similar. They had water in them, boulders, and trees. And often they were told at the beginning, go and find where you feel most comfortable to be in the garden. And there they could just start off by just being in the garden. Nothing more, just by being and sitting. And that whole concept of garden as refuge. As they moved on, they were able to start doing things in the garden, and that may be working with seedlings or working in the greenhouse. And again, that's actually, if you like, you're slowing down to nature's pace there. But also because when people get burnout, you get aches and pains all over your body. So it's not just the levels of depression, it's the low levels of energy. So they got more involved in the garden, and then eventually they got involved in group activity. And what they found is that something like 60% were able to return to some type of work, and they reduced their attendance at the doctor, the family doctor, from say 30 to average of 30 times a year to 5 times a year. And many of them went on to do gardening things thereafter. But when we start to look at why is this so, she really does look at this, partly because the repetitive nature of many garden tasks means that we enter this state of flow when we're doing them. And flow was something that was discovered by a Hungarian psychologist called Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. I've learned how to pronounce it, but I cannot spell it. And what that does is it increases the levels of antidepressant neurotransmitters. Now, we've already mentioned dopamine, but that also includes endorphins, serotonin, especially as well. And these all are the feel-good hormones. And also, when you're in a state of flow, you're less self-scrutinizing. Because what happens when people get depression or they've got burnout, they start to really ruminate on themselves and see things negatively. And also your sense of time shortens. So you're looking at the past or the current. What gardening does, because you're looking at something, you're planting a seed, you're planting something which has a future. It takes you into a different time span. So you have to look to the future as well and embrace what might be. It also brings, and I think April, especially in the UK, has this amazing sense of optimism because it's all of sort of life bursting forth. And you can start to see the shoots coming up from about January. You're watching the shoots as they come up through the ground. And I know from my own observation and loving gardening as I do, that in the dark days of January, it really gives you hope. So the other thing that they found is with these people was when they're caring for seedlings, it suggests to them they need to care for themselves more. But also when you're pulling up weeds, because that's very therapeutic, get rid of that bad one, out you go, out you go, out you go. Also helps them to let go of toxic feelings, which I thought was a really good, and I've never thought of it like that. But actually when I'm getting it, you're not welcome here. Actually, yeah, that is true. You're feeling that you're weeding things out. And also it softens the feelings of harsh criticism that people get when they're suffering from depression. So it is about this, and working outside increases your sense of mental space because you've got the sky above you. It's a very big space. So increases the sense of possibility and all that. And also it's forgiving. If you cock it up this year, you can get it right next year. So it's not the be all and end all. And it is getting you into this idea of slow time, which Jung brought about. But what he says is not actually being slow, but it's about that slow time and living a living relationship with the present. And what I found absolutely fascinating is both Jung and Freud, who of course fell out. Freud was Jung's mentor, and then they had a big falling out. But both of them were very much into gardening and the therapeutic aspects of gardening. So Jung used to take himself a place to a place where there was no technology, and actually write in the morning and live without electricity and all of the comforts, and spend time of his gardening. And Freud was always filling the house with flowers and spending time in the outdoors and in gardens as well. So even in their fallout, they had this commonality as well. And I also, one of the things, I've worked for short-term contracts in the NHS, and one of the things that brings up is this idea that many hospitals deny you access to outside space. A prisoner gets more access to outside space. Yet we know it brings healing possibilities. I think many hospitals are not healing spaces. They're in the midst of a concrete car park. You're not allowed flowers anymore because of risk of bacteria getting onto the wards. But we need people to be in a healing environment. There's one hospital that does meet that, and that's Birmingham Royal Orthopaedics. When they did their extension, they got people to sponsor trees. And it's actually built in the woodland area because it's on the edge of the Bourneville estate, where the factory manager from Cadbury's Bourneville used to live. They took over the house and built around it. So they do have gardening. And actually, the last time I was there, the people that were coming in to do the gardens were people who were recovering from a period of mental illness. So it was benefiting both the patients that were there and the people in other areas as well. But I've got it's one of my real personal bugbears about needing a healing environment. It should feel good. And Florence Nightingale recognised that, and she did bring gardens and flowers to people. Whereas some of the nurses thought they were a frivolity, she could see the benefit of when people were surrounded by gardens. And I think it's this hope. And also when you get gardens, you get wildlife, you get birds coming and feeding. So again, it's this optimism, this hope, this feeling of peace and rest. And there's also Horatio's garden down near Southampton, one for spinal patients that was actually built in memory of Horatio that died on a very sad expedition to the Antarctic. But it's that being, you can just be and have refuge in a garden, but also you can do. So you can, when you're there, you see things that need doing. So you get the benefits of pulling up a weeds and getting rid of toxic thoughts, or sometimes even cutting something down that's turned into a garden thug. So you can absolutely be, you see the jobs, but you can actually do, and it has that therapeutic quality, which just really allows you to feel you're doing something positive and actually also looking towards the future. And when we think that depression has recently overtaken respiratory illnesses worldwide as a leading cause of ill health and disability, we could actually do much more about that if we actually did encourage people to be in green space, but not only just to be in it, to actually nurture green space as well. So it nourishes us in every way, the sensory way, a physical way, and it stimulates emotional, spiritual, and cognitive aspects of our life and our being as well. So I thought these 3 chapters together were absolutely phenomenal on drawing everything that she'd said before.
Brilliant, thank you. Rebecca, views on what Gill's just been talking about?
Well, I think one point that she said there about burnout reminded me of something. I think it was earlier in the book. She talked about this idea that we've kind of developed this idea that your brain is a computer. That's the analogy that often gets used to kind of explain how the brain works, etc. And she talks about kind of how the brain is actually more similar to a garden, and actually the kind of picture on the front of the book kind of almost demonstrates that. And this idea that you know, all of the little neurons are kind of connected, and it's not, as I had previously thought, just about creating more and more and more and more and more connections. It's actually about pruning. So through relaxation time and reflection time, you're also kind of pruning, right? And then you've created more ability for stronger connections to kind of take place. And I'd never kind of, well, A, understood that, or B, kind of reflected on the fact that there is this idea of regression for growth. And I think that, you know, that's then reflected in kind of improving your mental health, you know, slowing down, etc. You're doing this exercise of pruning your mental, you know, brain so that it can then grow stronger and better, which I thought was an incredibly interesting idea.
Brilliant, thank you. Alyson?
And I think just building on what Rebecca's just said, she does talk about this this brain-derived neurotropic factor, which is great, but it's not just, it's engaged through gardening because it has all sorts of elements. It's the elements of learning, the pleasure, the socializing, and the exercise. So you've got all of those things that make it such a powerful intervention. And you know, so it's not just one aspect. It puts a whole new meaning, and also creates that whole balance from what Gill was saying, that balance of doing, you know, getting a job done versus being, and so being connected in the moment.
Excellent. Okay, we are all pretty much out of time now, so I'm just going to very quickly mention the Incredible Edible project. So it basically started out that it was a derelict health centre on the outskirts of Manchester, and the idea was to give people a bit more of understanding of what they were eating. So they started off by planting runner beans, and gradually more and more people have been involved, to the point now where 3/4 of the community actually grow their own vegetables. So it's a really amazing project, and they have a community gardening day every other Sunday, where there's always at least 30 people of all ages that go there. So I just thought it was a really, really interesting community experiment that seems to have done really, really well. So any kind of comments on that, or should we skip to final thoughts? Okay, we'll go final thoughts then. So Gill, kind of a bit of a summary from you, or key learning point from the book?
Well, I think it's just gardening is so much more than a garden. It's gardening good for wildlife diversity, because there's a richness in suburban gardens, and it's good for us, both body and soul.
Excellent. Okay, Rebecca?
Well, I want to share a final thought and just say thank you. I never would have picked up this book on my own. Wouldn't have Googled it or picked it up from a bookshelf. But my goodness, has it changed so much for me, not just in understanding, but I've got little seed trays all over the place now. We've kind of put in a vegetable raised beds outside, and I get it. It's gardening is a very different hobby to a hobby for all the reasons we've discussed, and many more that she shares in the book. And so thank you. If nothing else, this is a really shifted how I'm going to live my life from now on. So thank you.
Amazing, that's cool. And Alyson?
I'm just going to use the quote, and again, one from the book, linking back to what Gill was talking about, Freud being a great garden lover. And he said, flowers are restful to look at. They have neither emotions or conflicts.
Well, that's lovely. Okay, so next time, and I think we've already got one person that's already read this, so we're going to be talking about how to get your act together, a judgment-free guide to diversity and inclusion for straight white men. So this is by Suki Sandhu. So we will advertise this, but I guess it'll probably be in a month or so's time. So hopefully you can join us for that. And thank you very much for reading. Thank you to everyone that's been watching today. It's been a really, really interesting book, as I said. So thanks again, Rebecca, Gill and Alyson, and see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.